The following case will take us back to the time around of World War II, to Italy, a country known for its rich culture, friendly people, and beautiful landscapes. This is in stark contrast to the gruesome events that transpired in this story, as we will look at one of the most insidious serial killers of the 20th century, Leonarda Cianciulli, who turned her victims into cakes and soap in the belief that it would protect her son. But what makes a mother commit such heinous acts for her child? Welcome back, everybody. My name is DocFeedy. I'm a MD who likes to talk about cases and true stories with a medical touch that people such as you and I have suffered through. So, if you like what I do, stick around and let's get into this case. Leonarda Cianciulli was born in 1894 in the town of Montello, towards the south of Italy. At this time, Italy was still a monarchy of states, united under a king. And while the birth of a child, across all cultures, usually constitutes a new beginning, something intrinsically pure and elating, this was not the case for Leonarda Cianciulli. She was the result of forceful intercourse, her mother being violated by her father. Some of the later observers of this case say that from the start, Leonarda's life was under a bad spell due to this, being conceived under a sinful star only to turn corrupted herself. And whether you believe in this or not, the fact remains that after her birth, her life would only get worse and worse. Her father would end up marrying the woman he violated, but ended up dying when Leonarda was still a toddler. Her mother apparently disliked her one and only child, being a seemingly constant reminder of what she had suffered through. This relationship would only get worse as Leonarda grew up. Even after her mother remarried, the family lived in extreme poverty. Mental instability seemed to manifest early in Leonarda's life, unsurprisingly so, one might add, and she tried to take her life on 2 occasions. While researching this story, I remarked something interesting. In her own autobiography, that is to be taken with a heavy spoonful of salt, Leonarda herself mentions that in addition to her mental health issues, she was suffering from epilepsy, which was further aggravating her physical and mental health. Whether this statement is true or false cannot be determined anymore, but if she did have seizures, it is also not clear whether they were quote-unquote genuine epileptic seizures, triggered by an overload of electric activity in the brain, or whether she suffered dissociative or psychogenic seizures that don't result from dysfunction in brain signal transmission, but that are seizure-like manifestations of psychological distress and a correlate for underlying mental illness, something that might have been an early sign of her beginning mental decay. However, on the other side, if she did have actual, quote-unquote, structural epilepsy, it is possible that some of her erratic behaviors and bizarre thoughts might have come from the residual brain damage of seizures not being treated adequately, given her poor living conditions. But that aside, let's move on to Leonarda's adult life and her gradual transformation into a serial killer. As Leonarda became an adult, her parents chose her to be married to a wealthy man. But she refused her parents' chosen match, and instead, at 21 years old, opted to marry Raffaele Pansardi, a registry clerk who was much older than her at the time. With this act of defiance, the family bond was ultimately broken, as Leonarda would forever distance herself from her mother, who highly disapproved of the marriage. Leonarda, highly superstitious, believed that her decision to go against her parents' wishes would lead to her being cursed for the rest of her life by her own mother. One might find this thought amusing at first, but knowing where Leonarda came from, what she went through at this point, and what will happen later in her life, one can't help but wonder how much of it is really just superstition. For when she tried to start a family, disaster struck. Leonarda got pregnant 17 times, but only ended up having 4 of those children. She suffered 3 miscarriages, and 10 of the children died during their early days. Thus, she became incredibly protective of her remaining 4 children. Having a miscarriage or losing a single child can be severely distressing to any parent, but having that happen several times, and 13 times at that, the unluckiest number of all, in total, with the belief in her own mother's curse, it is hence not surprising that Leonarda turned to higher powers and superstition for help and solace. She herself would work, among other things, as a fortune teller. Because Leonarda not only struggled with her building her family, the financial struggles from her childhood carried over to her adult life, even as she was married. She and her family were moving throughout Italy, trying their luck in several places as their family grew. Struggling to make ends meet, she would eventually end up getting jailed for fraud in 1927. After her release, the family tried their luck in the commune of Lacedonia, but once they reached some level of stability, their house ended up being destroyed in the Irpina earthquake of 1930. Fate had struck again. Her and her family were now homeless. They were forced to move once again, ultimately finding themselves in Correggio, in the north of Italy, where the following events took place. In Correggio, Leonarda opened a small shop, selling a wide array of goods, including clothes and soap. Her husband became an alcoholic and seemingly left without a trace, leaving Leonarda alone with her children. Despite this, for the first time in her life, Leonarda was respected in her community and was known to be a loving mother to her 4 remaining children, as per the stereotypical Italian image of the overprotective nonna. Her favorite child was Giuseppe, her eldest son. When World War II reared its head, Giuseppe was determined to support the war effort on Benito Mussolini's side by enlisting himself. This shocked Leonarda, undoubtedly faced with a very real possibility of losing another child. By that time, Leonarda had already fully devoted herself to superstition and black magic. She became restless and desperate, and wanted to protect her son at all costs. In her world, only one thing would protect him from the same higher powers that were haunting her through her curse. In Leonarda's paranoid mind, this last resort was human sacrifice. And so, Leonarda set out to kill, in the belief that it would keep her cherished son alive. Regarding the murders, Leonarda's MO was always the same, and very calculating at that. She would get close to the victims, all of them women, and tell them she'd found a promising job prospect or partner for them. The catch was, of course, not only that this was not the case, but that this opportunity would always be far away from Correggio. Once the victims were convinced of this story, Leonarda would instruct them to tell nobody about their plans. She would then invite the women to her place, where she would dictate letters and postcards to the victims that Leonarda would send to the families after the killings to give herself an alibi and keep up the charade that these women were still alive. After the letters were written and Leonarda was sure that no one would suspect her, she began killing the victims. She would drug the women first with laced wine. Afterwards, Leonarda Cianciulli would then brutally kill the women using an axe. A total of 3 women were murdered this way by Leonarda. But this story would not be so infamous if this was the point where the brutality ended. A fair warning now, the next part of the story will be fairly macabre. Leonarda's first victim was also her oldest. It was 70-year-old, unmarried and lonely Faustina Setti. Under the premise that Leonarda, who also worked as a matchmaker at the time, found a husband for the old woman in another city, she lured her first naive victim in. After proceeding the same way as mentioned before, once Leonarda had used her axe to kill Setti, she would then dismember the body into several parts and collect the victim's blood. She would then take the chopped up body parts, throw them into a pot, and used caustic soda from her soap-making business to make the victim's body parts dissolve and disappear. More heinously though, Leonarda used the woman's coagulated blood to mix in with flour, sugar, chocolate and eggs to make cake, tea cake to be more precise, and served this cake to her guests at tea time. She even offered some to her unknowing beloved son and ate some herself, turning those around her into unwilling cannibals. Leonarda's second victim was a woman named Francesca Soavi, whom Leonarda killed in September of 1940. Francesca had been lured in, killed, and processed the same way as the first victim, all under the premise that Leonarda Cianciulli had found her a job in another city. Her third and last victim was a woman called Virginia Cacioppo, a widowed soprano singer looking for work. She also, unfortunately, fell for Leonarda's ruse, this time being promised a renowned secretary position for a powerful businessman. However, this third killing deviates from the last two by the way that Leonarda disposed of the victim's body. She would not use the caustic soda to just dissolve the body. As Leonarda Cianciulli would later state,
"She ended up in the pot, like the other two. Her flesh was fat and white. When it had melted, I added a bottle of cologne, and after a long time on the boil, I was able to make some most acceptable creamy soap. The cakes too were better. That woman was sweet.
Leonarda Cianciulli had turned her last victim into soap, hence earning her the nickname of the soap maker of Correggio. At the end of the killings, Leonarda Cianciulli doubly profited from the victims, as not only did she kill them in the belief that it would help her son and use their body parts for various conveniences, she would also keep the money that these women had given her as payment for the seemingly stellar opportunity that Leonarda had provided to them. In short, Leonarda Cianciulli was merciless in every way possible. But she made a mistake with her last victim, for she did not know that the soprano singer's sister-in-law, concerned with the latter's disappearance, had seen her go into Leonarda's house right before she disappeared and had informed the police. It was also revealed that Leonarda had received larger sums of money from her victims. So, an investigation was soon opened, and Leonarda was swiftly arrested after a victim's jewelry was found at her house. At first, she was reluctant to confess, but eventually broke down and told investigators the truth, but only once she saw the very thing she wanted to protect in danger. This was when the police tried to implicate her beloved son Giuseppe in the murders. So, Leonarda confessed. Her motherly love marked the beginning and the end of her crime spree. With a clear confession, the trial that followed was short. Leonarda was tried in 1946, almost 7 years after she had planned her first murder. She was found guilty for all 3 murders by the Italian court and sentenced to a total of 33 years, 30 of which were to be served in prison, followed by 3 years in a criminal asylum, as she was considered of unsound mind. Now, this is where superstition comes into the story again, for Leonarda Cianciulli later said that she had visited a fortune teller in her younger years who had told her,
"In your right hand, I see a prison. In your left, a criminal asylum."
The veracity of this particular story seems more than just dubious. It is unclear whether this is Leonarda coping after the fact with her decisions, seemingly being led by an invisible thread into her fate, or whether truly something more dark and sinister had taken control of her mind, given her mother's curse. It is noted by media representation of this case that Leonarda Cianciulli never seemed remorseful for her actions. After all, her son Giuseppe survived World War II, so in a way, Leonarda had seemingly accomplished her goals. 24 years after her initial sentencing, after writing an autobiography from jail, she died on October 15, 1970, after suffering a stroke. Her gruesome crimes left a memory in Italian pop culture, with movies made about her, and her murder tools still being on display in a museum in Rome. This was the story of the soapmaker of Correggio, Leonarda Cianciulli, a case riddled with misfortune, superstition, and cold-bloodedness. And at the end of it, a few questions remain. Was Leonarda Cianciulli mentally ill? Well, it certainly seemed so. But also, were there actually some kind of unnatural forces leading her to become the way that she was and do the things that she did? Or were her own beliefs of curses and misfortunes a self-fulfilling prophecy for her in the end? Thank you for watching.